Kanye seeks to make America great, Donald Trump's face on a glacier, Boy Scouts no more, and follow me on my new Twitter account, @DukePesta. All this and more next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Duke, and thank you for joining us today. As always, I am joined by the Healthy Republic's Katie Petrick for the Countdown. Katie, stories for the week?
We are sounding the trumpet. We have a series of stories that involve President Trump, and the first involves Kanye, the one and only. He's been quite busy on Twitter lately, and he's been putting out all these tweets that have been causing a lot of controversy, making comments about how people should think for themselves, heaven forbid. And then he tweeted out a picture of his signed MAGA hat, and the left exploded. One of those people who exploded was the representative from one of the representatives from California, Maxine Waters. And she said specifically that Kanye West talks out of turn, and perhaps sometimes he needs some assistance in helping him to formulate some of his thoughts.
Oh boy. So wait, this is the same Kanye West who accused George W. Bush of hating black people and blowing up the levees, right? This is the same Kanye West who put himself as Jesus on the magazine cover, crucified,
One
right?
and only.
And the liberals had no problem with that. They thought that was great. They thought that was incredible. He basically comes out and says, let's think for ourselves, and maybe Trump has got some good ideas. And in the words of Maxine Waters, people be losing their minds, right? And what I love about this is, when you think about that, put that quote back up there, the one that you just, the first part of that quote. Sometimes Kanye West talks out of turn, and perhaps sometimes he needs to have some assistance in helping to keep those thoughts to himself. In other words, she's black-splaining to him, isn't she?
She is.
She is telling an African-American male, an entrepreneur, right? She's telling one of the cultural icons of this generation to get back in line, right? To quit stepping out of line, to quit trying to be uppity, right? I mean, in other words, what she's doing to Kanye, if you and I tried to do this to Kanye, ooh, we'd never hear the end of it. What's the rest of that quote, though? That was the first part of it.
Yep, so she continues, we don't think that he actually means to do harm, but we're not sure he really understands the impact of what he's saying. I think maybe he should think twice about politics and maybe not have so much to say. Right,
so think twice and say nothing, right? Censorship, right? Think twice, don't say anything. Review your opinion. Don't get off that plantation. In the words of Michael Scott from The Office, never touch a black man's radio, as he did Chris Tucker, right? It's the same thing here. Crazy Auntie Max up in her Mad Woman in the Attic stuff in California. I do not understand, right? The thing that really bothers me the most about this is when people like Maxine Waters, when they say these things, they enable all sorts of closeted white liberal racists to come out and attack Kanye the same way. If you look at some of the tweets that Kanye is getting from pasty white liberals lecturing Kanye about how he's selling out his own people, it's hysterical. Nothing gets white liberals happier than when they can go after black people, right? And with people like Sheila Jackson Lee and Maxine Waters saying dumb stuff like that, you are enabling a complete army of liberal tool bags who now feel like they're entitled to give racial business to Kanye because he stepped out of line and supported Trump.
Yeah, and if you take a look at any of his lyrics, you would know a lot of more information about Kanye. But I think in his own defense of his song, Paranoid, he needs to tweet this out. Why are you so paranoid? Don't be so paranoid. And then just tag Maxine Waters and see what happens.
If you took paranoia away from Maxine Waters, she'd become Hillary Clinton with a bad wig. That's all you'd have left.
That is very true. All right, next story. President Trump is considering a Space Force. So he just had the football team from West Point to the White House, and he announced that, his pride in all 5 of our branches of the military, but he announced that we're getting very big in space, both militarily and for other reasons, and we're seriously thinking of the Space Force.
Well, when you think about the fact that Barack Obama turned NASA into a global warming outreach team whose job it was to make insecure Muslims in the Middle East feel good about their accomplishments 1,000 years ago, when you consider what Obama did to an organization like NASA, I'm 100% supportive of Donald Trump reinvigorating the American space race. If he wants to call it the Space Force, more power to him. I'm just grateful that he didn't tweet out and call it Spaceballs. Luckily, we already had that movie. That would have been very Trumpian. So in honoring our Trump-themed opening segment here, let's just leave it at that and move on.
Okay, and the final story with President Trump is Project Trump More. So Melting Ice, a climate change group from Finland, they want to raise $500,000 so that they can put this 115-foot sculpture of Trump's face on a glacier in Iceberg. And they don't know where they're going to put it yet, so they want help from anyone who's willing to.
So this
participate.
organization, this environmentalist group, if I understand you correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they want to go to the trouble and the expense of carving Donald Trump's face into a glacier so that when the glacier melts, it becomes a sort of weeping symbol of global warming. Is that right?
Yep.
Well, given that the Arctic snow is back, given that the glaciers are extending again, given that the northern seas are all refreezing now, by all means, go ahead and carve Trump's face into a glacier in the Arctic. And you know what's going to happen? It's going to outlive Mount Rushmore. It'll be around. Mount Rushmore will crumble from earthquakes, and that iceberg's going to stand. That glacier's going to stand because they're not receding anymore. They're not melting. So that would be the perfect ironic tribute, right? As Teddy Roosevelt's face and Abe Lincoln's face come crumbling down when the geysers, right, in our great national forest finally blow. Trump's face will be sitting there encased in ice by itself. Well, just laughing at Al Gore.
The best part is if they get the funding and this actually happens and they put it wherever they're going to put it, they're going to have a live stream. They're going to install a live stream so you can just sit there and stare at President Trump and hope
I
and
guarantee
pray.
you, whaling boats full of Greenpeace activists are going to sail out to that glacier because it's not going to melt, and they're going to have blow dryers, and they're going to try to melt Trump's face. And in the spirit of reciprocity, who else can we in the name of stupidity, who else's name can we put on things? I project, why don't we do a huge, monumental Swiss cheese carving of Al Gore's face? Because the whole global warming theory is full of holes. It'd be a perfect image to project on Swiss cheese. Could you think of anybody else?
I'd say Nancy Pelosi and on a loaf of bread so that all her crumbs can fall away, because that's how she describes any money that we...
The crumbs.
We
could start doing a lot of projections, right? Holograms of famous people.
We'll see what happens. Well, hopefully they get their $500,000 so that we can get those other projects then funded. We're going to move on, though, to Pope Francis. He took to Twitter, and he basically had what I consider to be the dumbest comment ever written by a church authority. And he tweeted out, "Do we really want peace? Then let's ban all weapons so we don't have to live in fear of war."
Yeah, so weapons are responsible for wars. It's almost like he's John Lennon. When did the Pope, he's smoking blunts, he's got the little glasses on, when did the Pope become John Lennon? Imagine there's no hell. We got that a couple weeks ago from him, right? Well, I mean, this is just juvenile. I mean, and with all due respect to the Pope, 500 years ago, his Roman Catholic Church was burning heretics at the stake. So do we ban fire? Is that what we're going now? Let's ban fire. Doing. Do we ban wood?
Yes.
Right? So, you know, I take it with a grain of salt. And what's going to happen is we're going to get the 8,000 Roman Catholic Vatican officials scrambling to tell you what he really meant. Yeah. He didn't really mean that. Here's what he really meant. And so, if we're going to ban everything that's going to be dangerous to people, and again, and it's not just the Roman Catholic Church, we've got stones, right? Islamic fundamentalists are stoning women in the deserts. We've got hundreds of years ago, again, the Roman Catholic Church burning people at stakes. You've got to get rid of a whole fingers. I mean, we're going to have to go fingerless, right? Jesus actually said, if your arm is the problem, cut it off, right? Maybe that's the Pope's whole argument. Everything that might cause anybody pain or suffering or war, just cut it off. I mean, and the environmentalists would love that because there wouldn't be people left.
Well, we'll see what happens on that one as well, I guess.
Let's put the Pope on an iceberg.
He'll be the next
just a question for you. How much money, if you did that, if you actually carved Trump's face into a glacier, I should say, how many people, what entrepreneur would sail out there and chip off pieces of that glacier and then use it for Trump teenies, right? The pure essence of Trump distilled from natural glaciated water, right?
Yeah, we'll see. I'm just trying to imagine.
1,000 money-making ops. We gotta do a GoFundMe so these lunatics
That's
can go
what
out
they're
there
doing is a GoFundMe.
Let's do it.
We'll start our counter GoFundMe.
Kick in some cash for that.
All right, moving on again. After 108 years, the Boy Scouts of America are no more. Now it's Scouts, BSA. So the Boy Scouts basically came out and announced that their group of Boy Scouts from 11 to 17-year-olds, that grouping, is now going to be called just Scouts because girls get to be involved. And they're on this new campaign called Scout Me In. Basically, Chief Scout Executive Michael Serbow said that they had many names considered for their new Scouts, and after an incredibly fun and lengthy discussion, they came to Scouts BSA. We wanted to land on something that evokes the past, but also conveys the inclusive nature of the program going forward. We're trying to find the right way to say we're here for both young men and young women.
Yeah, I think they should just give it up and call it the Soy Boy Scouts. This way you could keep that effeminate kind of estrogenal kind of worldview going on with the boys. But the real problem I have with this is this. So the Girl Scouts, apparently, who don't let boys in. So you got the Boy Scouts now.
Well, only if
boys who identify as girls, right? Yeah. So the Girl Scouts will not let boys in. They will let soy boys in.
Soy boys in,
but they won't let boys in. So the Girl Scouts, in this wonderfully inclusive, the word he used was inclusive, in this wonderfully inclusive culture we have, the Girl Scouts don't have to include boys unless those boys check their boyhood at the door and become girls, right? The Boy Scouts that feel the need to absolutely sell out boys and bring girls in. So here's the thing that bothers me. The Girl Scouts now have come out, leaders of the Girl Scouts now have come out and said that they are going to aggressively do what it takes to win those girls back from the Boy Scouts to the Girl Scouts.
Yes, they are.
So the Boy Scouts don't really want boys, they want girls.
Yes.
The Girl Scouts are going to the mat to bring the girls back to the Girl Scouts. Nobody wants the boys. Here's a novel idea, American. Maybe these unwanted boys, nobody wants them. Boy Scouts don't like them anymore. The Girl Scouts don't want them either. Maybe the boys can form their own organization just of boys and call it the Boy Scouts.
That's a novel idea.
I mean, wouldn't that be great? Hashtag, what's the hashtag? No weenies at the campfire. Hashtag no weenies at the campfire.
Or pudgy pies.
I'm staggered by it. The Girl Scouts don't want boys. The Boy Scouts don't really want the boys. The boys are on their own.
The boys.
Maybe they can form a group and call it the Boy Scouts.
We'll see what happens.
Why not? Let's do it.
I want to know, though, what's the new merit badges that they're going to have to create for these girls and boys being together in the Scouts BSA?
Wow. I mean, I guess for the little boy Girl Scouts, you could have the, do they call them, who are the Weebelows, by the way?
Weebelows,
are those little Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts?
No, they're Boy Scouts.
What are pixies?
You were not a Scout.
What are pixies?
I don't... imaginary creatures? They're not. There are no pixies.
There are no pixies? Weren't there pixies? There's
daisies.
Daisies? What's a Weebelow?
Brownie. A Weebelow, it's like the wolf. That's for... They're under... It's before you get to Boy Scouts who would be going on to get your Eagle Scout badge. So it's the 10, 11-year-olds roughly, or it might be like 3rd, 4th graders.
See, I know nothing about this.
See, you should be in Scouts.
Should be in Scouts?
You should have been in Scouts.
Would it have helped me?
I think it would have helped.
What merit badge would you come up with for our Scouts?
So
our new
I came up with
Scouts
several.
USA.
My first one is Beta Plus.
Beta Plus.
Instead of selling popcorn, because Girl Scouts sell cookies, Boy Scouts sell popcorn. Now they can sell soy lattes and they can host goat yoga in order to earn that badge.
And they can be Beta Boys.
Beta Boys.
I love that.
And then I came up with Safe Space because instead of building a campfire or building anything else, you can build your ideal safe space.
Here's where we're going. The only once you now start bringing all these girls into the Boy Scouts, the only safe space for the girls is if the boys leave.
Basically.
Right? And that's why the boys got to go start a boy club.
Yeah.
All these years, we've never had really a Boy Scouts club, have we? Now that the boys aren't wanted by the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, they can go start their own. So I'm promising you that's going to be it, right? Safe spaces for girls. Now that girls have been mandated and pushed into the Boy Scouts, the boys' presence, you watch how the boys' presence in the Boy Scout meetings now is going to overwhelm them.
Well, and the thing is, they've already announced that the boys and the girls will be divided along gender lines.
Of course they will.
Because they are concerned about the women or the girls being able to obtain leadership positions.
Yeah, exactly. So as long as there are boys in the Boy Scouts, or this new named Boy Scouts organization, the boys are going to, by their masculine privilege, overwhelm the girls. All right, so again, what are you doing it for, right? And that the corollary of what I just said holds true. The best place in the world for girls to learn leadership skills, given the parameters of modern feminism, is with no men around, right? Evidently, if there's one man within a 100-mile radius of a group of girls, he immediately tamps them down and inhibits them from actually achieving anything. So the best thing you can do now is send the Girl Scouts back to the Girl Scouts, safe space, away from boys, because we know the Girl Scouts aren't inclusive. Let the boys go form an organization for the lost and forgotten boys called... Hashtag the Boy Scouts.
Oh,
no weenies at the campfire.
Or pudgy pies.
That's the theme of our show today. No weenies at the campfire.
Okay, well, moving on again. The Mental Health Center, speaking of people mentally needing some mental health, at the University of Texas, hook 'em horns, it's having to defend its masculinity re-education program. So the University of Texas came out with this program, and they're calling it Masculine UT. So Masculine UT. They issued a statement because they received some flack saying that they were not treating masculinity that they were treating masculinity as a mental health issue, and they're saying no, we're not doing that. However, if you look at their website for it and the program they're actually running, they're treating masculinity as if it's a mental health issue.
Of course they are.
And so they're saying men, the program argues, they suffer from this thing being that they're told to act like a man, or when they're encouraged to fulfill traditional gender roles, that they're always told to be successful and they have to be the breadwinner. And obviously this creates stress and emotional distress on the men. And so this program has come up with different posters and flyers, and they're using this at the University of Texas. And they're basically defining what they believe masculinity to be.
They are treating masculinity, malehood, as a dysfunction. It's as a mental disorder, right? And this is the logical outcome. If you're going to treat gender dysphoria, gender confusion as a serious thing, if you're going to take kids, young kids as young as 5 and 6 years old, who are 8 years away from puberty, you're going to take kids that young and let them determine what they are simply by saying it, and you're going to mainstream gender dysphoria, gender confusion, this irrational instability. You're going to treat that as actual true things. Then, by definition, male and female have to become both dysfunctional. We're starting with male. I think it's really disturbing because what you're telling kids, little young boys, what you're telling boys, that whether it's in the elementary school or the high school or the colleges, you're telling boys that the impetus in the male to protect, the impetus in the male to provide, the impetus in the male to sacrifice is of itself a kind of derangement syndrome, a cultural construct that is projected on them by culture, then you are destroying the reason to be for boys. You're completely you're psychologically emasculating them, you're mentally and spiritually emasculating them. And given that this is at the University of Texas, whose mascot is hook'em horns, right? You can't get a more phallic imagery than that, right? And so maybe they just ought to take Bevo, the bull, and castrate them, right? And so they could be the steers instead of the bulls, because a steer, I believe, from a quick search on that authoritarian internet, as we know, the Wikipedia, a steer is a castrated bull, right? I mean, that's got to be the next thing. And here's an actual picture that you've got up now of a young boy, right, who is both male and female, apparently.
Well, yeah, they have these different posters that they're providing the campus, and they're hanging them up around campus, and they announce how you can print them off yourself, you can stop in and get your own. And all of them are supposed to represent the different definitions they're claiming of masculinity. However, not one of them identifies at all or indicates anything where, hey, maybe I do want to play sports, or hey, maybe I do want to be the breadwinner. All of them discuss more surface level things. And I pulled out these two because they talk about how I can wear makeup and I can do things that are more feminine. But my argument is that they're arguing you have, in order to be me as a woman, I have to wear a dress or I have to wear makeup, and they're applying maybe something I don't identify with, and they're trying to flip it. Well,
you see what they've got there, right? Their incredibly woke, progressive sensibility views femininity as a Daisy May apron with a bow on it, right? In their tremendously progressive sensibilities, they believe men becoming women is about painting their faces, right? Yeah. It's all the stereotypes. So they're just reinventing stereotypes and replacing them. It's all they're doing. And this is the thing. And notice what they're doing here. When men become women, they actually become more men, better men. It's the masculine traits, right? The aggressiveness, the confidence, the assuredness, the strong, silent nature of manhood, the provide and protect. That now is all toxic. Mm-hmm. And so we want the more our men become like women, the more acceptable they are. But if you're a woman who's transitioning to a man on college, then all those masculine stereotypes, right, suddenly are good things. Mm-hmm. The butch haircut, the wallet with the chain on it, right, the mom jeans, suddenly all that, those absolute stereotypes of lesbianism and masculine women, they become the same thing. They do the exact same thing with them. They project them on women becoming men. So all they're doing is they've kept the same reviled and despicable stereotypes. They've just transferred them one to the other.
Yeah, well, they are looking to hire someone as the Healthy Masculinities Coordinator. So if you're tired of doing something like this,
bet you my bottom dollar they hire a woman for that job. How much you want to bet?
A cisgender woman or a
cisgender woman? Cisgender is a woman is a woman who thinks she's a woman, right? Yes, oh, that's passe. Nobody thinks that anymore.
Just want to see who it is.
I think.
All right, finally.
It'll be a woman in Argyle, I'll tell you that.
Hey. Maybe I'll get paid a little bit more. Okay.
Not by me.
So finally, a new Reuters poll shows that Democrats are losing ground with millennials. And you'll never believe it, but young white males are fleeing fastest.
Really?
It's a
young
shocker.
White males who are being told from the time they're in elementary school that their entire identity is toxic. Young white males who are involved in rape culture no matter what they do. Young white males who have all of this incredible privilege to be able to boss people around and get what they want. You mean they're leaving the Democrat Party?
It's a shocker.
Staggering.
I couldn't believe it myself.
Where are they going?
Well, a lot of them are saying, you know what, in 2018, I may vote for a Republican instead.
Wow.
It's shocking. But it's what they're saying. They've lost basically 9 percentage points overall with the millennial generation from the 2016 to 2018. And they looked at more than 16,000 registered voters. So it's a pretty decent sized sample for these usual polls. And basically, they've lost 9 percentage points. A lot of it has to do with economic issues.
Yeah, that's right. And you're also, when you think about registered voters, the vast majority of millennials don't register. I mean, aren't registered. A good number of them aren't. And the problem with this is that they're not only not registered. I guess what I'm trying to say is the problem is worse for the Democrats than it seems. If of registered voters, they're down 9–10% in the polls, you have to recognize that there are a lot of unregistered millennials, too, who are probably following in that trend. My thinking is, I'm not sure the Republicans are going to get all or even most of those votes. I think you're going to get more libertarian, more likely to get more libertarian kids who just won't vote. I think you're going to see a lot more apathy. If the American left is counting on the millennial generation and counting on the kids, I think they have missed the mark. These are kids that can't come to class, that can't follow a schedule. These kids that can't follow simple instructions at work. They're kids that are pretty. When we did a story a couple weeks ago about 6 to 8 hours a day, millennials spend anxious and stressed out. That millennials have this difficulty connecting to other people. New study out today that shows it's not the elderly who are the most lonely people in America. The most lonely people are America's young millennials and younger kids. They feel utterly isolated and cast off. So I don't know what it means in the long run, but it is an interesting stat, and I'm not surprised. And you said mostly males, mostly boys?
Well, it's in terms of young white men tend to be flocking the most. But I make the argument that it's going to be, for the 2018 election, it's going to be who's ever dumbest last. Because the attention span of the American public, the attention span specifically of the millennial generation, is less than 2 seconds. So whoever's dumbest last is going to lose the vote.
And think, the progressives are now arguing that 16-year-olds should vote.
Absolutely. Get them out there.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, it's May, and we have a long way to go. We have grown accustomed to hearing of stories from college campuses about student protests and outrageous professors' comments. But a Division III university in central Wisconsin is drawing national attention for doing something that some argue is a logical consequence to such behaviors. The University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point has proposed to cut 13 liberal arts majors from its studies due to declining enrollment and the $4.5 million deficit the university faces. Some of the majors on the chopping block include history, English, geography, sociology, and political science. When I heard that this story was from my alma mater, I knew I had to get thoughts from one of my former professors and the current chair of the political science department, Dr. John Blakeman, whom I was able to speak with earlier today. Here's that interview. Dr. Blakeman, give us the insider's perspective on what the university is proposing and how this directly affects you and your department.
Well, what the university is proposing is to eliminate several majors in order to meet what we call a structural deficit, which is an ongoing deficit situation that we're going to have on an annual basis. And the argument is by eliminating these 13 majors, it will allow the university and the administration to shift faculty from one academic unit to another, to shift faculty and faculty lines, as we put it, from majors that are arguably under-enrolled to majors that will show more growth in the short term and in the long term. And the goal ultimately is to bring enrollment numbers at UWSP back up so there's enough revenue coming in to address the structural deficit.
Now, this country was built upon our founders having a broad liberal arts education, and Wisconsin's university system has long been analyzed as a beacon of education across the country. How do you think these cuts are going to affect the overall education of the next generations, and could this mean further cuts at universities nationwide?
Well, I'll answer your second question first, and yeah, I think the problems at UW and Stevens Point are problems that are nationwide, and you're going to find a lot of public comprehensive universities across the country that are about the same size we are, 7,500, about 9,000 to 10,000 students, going through these same issues. And it's just a reality of a couple of things. One, there are fewer high school graduates graduating. There's a demographic issue, so there's less demand for higher education going forward. And then number two, it's a matter of state appropriations. You know, very, very few states are appropriating a lot more spending for their public university systems. And, maybe to the point where taxpayers are starting to question the amount of money that they're willing to pay. Now, as far as your first question, will it impact the education that students receive? I'm biased, and I'm going to argue that it will, because even if you are a major in the natural sciences, like biology or chemistry, or you're a major in the fine arts, or you're a major in business, I will argue you still need a good, solid grounding in the liberal arts, in history, in the study of government, political science, the study of philosophy, because all of those things are going to develop your critical thinking skills and in this day and age, even your ability to use data.
And I want to ask you a question, because I was at the university about a decade ago, and from what I hear on what's happening on college campuses in today's age, it's a lot different from even a decade ago. So we hear these crazy stories of how students and professors today are acting in the classroom. And it seems to be that a lot of these classrooms are English classrooms or history and sociology. So when you see that these majors are also the ones being cut, from your perspective, how much of this is kind of a direct result of their actions?
I don't see that at all. And honestly, I think at UW-Stevens Point, maybe we've been a bit immune from some of that stuff. But I don't see this as any kind of retaliation at all. I see it mainly as a budgetary issue to try and help the university get out of an ongoing budgetary crisis. Now, that said, I think there are other ways we can resolve the budget issue, but nonetheless, I think that's the university administration's primary motivation here.
And finally, before we go, I guess, give us a little information on what is happening moving forward, because this isn't for sure going to be cut. These are proposals at this point. What is it that maybe you and your department or anyone on the university, what is it that they're doing to maybe alleviate these potential cuts?
Okay, well, first, the list of majors is only, as you put it, a proposal, and nothing is set in stone. And the administration has asked us in the majors effective to go back, reassess what we do, and try to figure out how to put in place more career-focused programming and how to more clearly define the career-oriented skills that we want our students to leave with. So right now, all departments that have been affected are doing just that. We are all going back. We are reassessing what we do. We're thinking about ways to make ourselves more competitive. We're especially thinking about ways to make our students more competitive. And, ultimately, what the administration has proposed may not actually happen. I think there's a good likelihood that it will. But I think you will see a lot of academic departments emerge out of this with new programming that makes their students more competitive.
Dr. Blakeman, thank you for your insight. We await to see what the university ultimately decides to do. More review will be done this summer before the UW System Board of Regents approves any cuts.
2018 marks the 200th anniversary of the birth of Karl Marx, a philosopher and an economist whose ideas had absolutely catastrophic consequences for world history. Upwards of 200 million dead in the name of socialism, Bolshevism, communism, Marxism, even Nazism. Nazism, of course, is National Socialism. When you think about the human death toll that can be laid at the feet of the founder of Marxist thought, it's remarkable but not surprising that Jason Barker, who is an associate professor of philosophy at Kyunghee University in South Korea, wrote a recent article, an opinion piece in the New York Times called "Happy Birthday, Karl Marx, You Were Right." It's typical academic professor New York Times garbage. It's one long love affair, how wonderful Marx was, how his ideas were all about the middle class. At one point, Barker calls Marx the philosopher of the middle class, which is interesting because it's mostly middle class people who were eradicated under socialism. The poor remained and the very rich remained, but that middle class who Barker says Marx was the advocate for, they're the ones who vanished into the gulags and the concentration camps. Well, this isn't surprising. Back in the 1930s, 1920s and 30s, the same New York Times had a reporter over in the Soviet Union, a fellow by the name of Walter Duranty. And what Duranty did is he was a big Marxist, loved Stalin. And as Stalin was systematically starving to death the Ukrainian people, 1 million Ukrainians dead, Walter Duranty ignored it. He wouldn't write about it. He did not inform American readers about it. As a matter of fact, he wrote glowing puff pieces about Stalin for the New York Times. That's what Americans were getting from him, even as Stalin was starving his own people to death. Well, what blows me away about Mr. Barker, Professor Barker, is he lives in South Korea. He's just a couple hundred miles away from the border of North Korea, where you have the modern Stalin, who is starving his own people to death. You have tremendous slavery. It's basically a slave state where the typical North Korean, lives in a poverty-like situation with absolute malnourishment, while the very rich at the top, the Kim Jong-un family, enjoy incredible opulence. The fact that this Professor Barker is just a few miles away from all that and yet writes an article for the New York Times, the same New York Times where Walter Duranty won a Pulitzer Prize for his lies about Stalin, it's not surprising that the liberal professor can't see it. It's a real shame, but the real legacy of Karl Marx on his birthday is not his birthday that we should celebrate, but 200 million birthdays that never get celebrated again. And that does it for us this week. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, and we'll see you next time.